Hello, and welcome to This Is Monsters. If you don't already know, this show is produced with seasons that are themed, and we're currently on Season 18, Killer Kids. I figured I'd add a little opening to the episodes to make sure everyone knows the theme, and to make sure YouTube knows the narration isn't AI. If you enjoy the channel, not necessarily the crimes, you can hit like on the video and subscribe for weekly stories. You can also check out my other channel, Somewhere Sinister, which is not entirely true crime, but true crime adjacent. A link is in the description. Thanks so much. On February 5th, 1921, Fred Burnell was preparing to feed his chickens when he realized that he had run out of grit to mix with the corn. Grit is an important part of the feed because it helps birds digest the food. He gave his 8-year-old daughter Frida a shilling and told her to run to the next street over to get some grit from the corn store. He told her that if she was fast enough, he'd give her a penny. Frida excitedly ran off to the store, but she would never be seen alive again. This is Monsters. It should have only taken Frida about 10 minutes to get to the corn store and back, so after about 30 minutes, Fred started to wonder where she had gone. He walked over to Mortimer's corn store and looked in the window but didn't see his daughter. Instead of going inside the store, he walked down the street to the co-op, which also sold chicken feed. He went inside and asked if anyone had seen Frida, but nobody had. By then, Fred was starting to worry, so he went to the town crier, who began announcing that the young girl was missing, encouraging anyone who had seen her to contact Fred. A few hours later, Fred reported his daughter missing to the police and a search party was organized. That evening, the cinema showed a description of the girl before the movie started. Police and locals searched through the night, but the following morning, Frida was still missing. Marianne Wiltshire had seen the message at the cinema the night before and told police that she saw Frida walking past her house at a little after 9 a.m. Marianne's house was between the Burnell's house and the feed shop, and her timeline matched when Fred said his daughter had left. When authorities went to Mortimer's to question the staff, they were told that Frida had been there the previous morning and that she was helped by the shop assistant, 15-year-old Harold Jones. Harold Jones was born on January 11, 1906 in Abertillery, Wales. He was the oldest of 4 children born to a coal miner and a housewife who was said to be rather poor. He and his siblings attended the local public school where he was said to do well academically and was also popular with the other kids. He played football and cricket in school and played the organ in church. He was an avid reader and dreamt of becoming a professional boxer. Harold left school at 14 in order to get a job and help support the family. From the outside, Harold was an exceptional child who was well regarded around town. When Harold was questioned, he told the police that he had served Frida. He had gotten her a bag of poultry spice, but when she asked for grit, he told her they didn't have any bags, but they did have loose grit. He explained that Frida said she was going to ask her father if loose grit was okay, and she left the shop. Shortly after that, Edward Thomas was on his way to work when he saw the girl's body on the side of the road near Mortimer's feed store. Investigators would discover that Frida had been bludgeoned on the head and strangled with a cord that was still around her neck. It's believed that the attacker also tried to sexually assault the girl. Police focused their investigation on a nearby barn, thinking that the girl had been killed there and then moved to the street later. There was no evidence that the attack had taken place in the barn, so the police were back at square one. The following Thursday, 5 days after the murder, Frida was laid to rest. The entire town shut down for the day as a sign of respect for the young girl. It was sometime around the funeral that the police were informed that Mortimer's had a small storage shed a few hundred yards from where Frida's body was found. When investigators checked out the shed, they found a small handkerchief just inside the door, and when they showed it to Frida's father, he said it was hers. It still had chalk on it from when she had used it to wipe down their chalkboard. They also found an axe handle that they believe was used to hit the girl over the head. With Harold being the last person to see Frida and being the only person besides Herbert Mortimer to have a key to the shed, he became the main suspect and the police opened an official inquest into him. The inquest was a court procedure to present evidence to see if the suspect could be taken to trial. One of the most important testimonies was by Francis Mortimer, the 10-year-old son of the shop owner. He had gone out to the shed with Harold at about 10:15 a.m. in order to retrieve a sack of potatoes. Harold told Francis to wait outside the shed with the cart, and then he went in alone and brought out the sack of potatoes. The issue was that Francis had gone out to the shed with Harold many times, and this was the first time he had ever asked him to wait outside. It was also the first time he didn't bring the cart into the shed. Normally, they would both go into the shed with the cart, load it up, and then leave together. This time, Harold went in alone, only opening the door enough to slip in and out with the potatoes. It seemed clear to the investigators that Harold had already killed Frida by then and her body was still in the shed. But the store owner Herbert Mortimer made it clear that he didn't believe Harold could have done it. He tried to claim that the assistant had been inside the store at the time it was believed that Frida was killed, but his testimony was vague and he didn't have any proof to back up his claim. There was a block of time between 9:15 and 9:40 where nobody could account for Harold's whereabouts. When Harold took the stand, he assured the court that he was innocent, but gave conflicting accounts of his actions the day of the murder. He even had to admit that he had lied about other parts of his testimony. The court determined that there was enough circumstantial evidence to charge Harold Jones with the murder of Frida Burnell. Things weren't looking good for Harold, but when his trial began, the entire town was having second thoughts about his guilt. Herbert Mortimer testified again in his defense, and his parents testified that he was home the evening of the 5th, so he wouldn't have been able to move the body. They said that he had always been a good boy, didn't drink, and never got into trouble. The headmaster from his former school testified to his academic success and his exemplary behavior. By the time the jury was sent back to deliberate, everyone in town was sure that Harold was innocent and he was acquitted of the crime. When Harold was released, he was almost treated like a hero. That evening, he was treated to a huge meal where he climbed up on the table and made a speech. He said, quote, "I thank you all. I do not hold a grudge against the people of Abertillery for the horrendous ordeal I have been put through." He was taken home on a horse-drawn carriage to streets lined with cheering people. Then he was presented with a gold pocket watch by the head of the town council. The idea that a 15-year-old could have sexually assaulted and murdered a child in their town was so inconceivable that the residents felt like Harold had just returned from his own private war. So instead of Harold Jones being locked behind bars where he should have been, he was free to return home where he murdered 11-year-old Florence Little just 17 days after his acquittal. This time, there was no question as to his guilt as the little girl's body was found in his house. On July 8, 1921, Florence, who had lived down the street from the Joneses, was playing outside with Harold's sister, Flossie. It was sometime that evening that Harold asked if Florence could come inside and help him with something. At about 10 o'clock, Florence's mother went to the Jones house and asked if her daughter was there. Harold answered the door just having gotten out of the bath and told Mrs. Little that Florence had been there but left some time ago. The Littles reported the girl missing to the police and, like with Frida, they spent all night searching, but she didn't turn up. The police, likely suffering from déjà vu, decided to search the Jones house, and one officer noticed some scuff marks around the door to the attic. It looked like it could have been blood and that someone had attempted to clean it up. When he went up the stairs, he found the body of Florence laying across the rafters with a head wound and a cut on her throat. A further search of the house would turn up a blood-stained knife, a saucepan under the sink that had blood and water in it, and a plank of wood with blood on it. When the police told Philip Jones about the discovery, he went outside, found his son talking to a friend, and made a citizen's arrest. Then he escorted his son to the police station where he was placed under arrest. When news got out around town, the locals were furious. A crowd gathered around the police station demanding for them to let Harold go. The crowd eventually grew to around 500 people, so the superintendent made a statement saying, quote, "I have found the body of the child in the attic of Harold Jones, foully murdered, and I have arrested Harold Jones. I think this is all I can tell you, and it would help if you disperse and go to your homes." Another inquest was opened and the evidence was presented to the court. This time it was nearly impossible to see Harold as innocent, and he was again set for trial. He initially proclaimed his innocence, but soon changed his mind and confessed to the murder of Florence Little. In his written confession, he cited his motive as a desire to kill. When Harold was asked what happened, he described asking Florence to come inside to help him with a chore. Once she was in the house, he immediately started strangling her and dragged her into the kitchen. He hit her on the head with a piece of wood, then pushed her head over the sink and used a pocket knife to cut her throat. After most of the blood had drained from her body, he dragged her upstairs and used some rope to hoist her into the attic. He was planning to wait until the coast was clear so he could move the body to a different location. Sound familiar? That's because he had killed Frida Burnell, and he confessed to that murder at the same time he confessed to the murder of Florence. It's believed that Harold's confession was a tactic to avoid the death penalty. At the time, no matter his age at the time of the crime, if the sentencing happened after he turned 16, he would be eligible for death. He changed his plea to guilty just 3 months before his 16th birthday. If he continued on with the trial, it would have likely run past that date, and since the evidence against him was so strong, he would have surely been found guilty. Harold Jones was sentenced to life in prison and was released in 1941 after serving 20 years and despite the advice of psychiatrists. He went to live with his aunt in Berkshire at first, then he joined the Merchant Navy. He eventually moved to London and started using the name Harry Stevens. He got married and had 2 children and was seen back in Abertillery on a number of occasions, the last time in 1965 when he went to his mother's funeral. Harold Jones died of bone cancer on January 2, 1971, just days before his 65th birthday. In the aftermath of the murders, Herbert Mortimer closed his shop and moved out of town. It's said that a combination of shame and ostracization over his false testimony had been the reason. People felt that if he hadn't testified on Harold's behalf, the boy would have been convicted of Frida's murder and wouldn't have been able to kill Florence. There are a few other unsolved murders that some think could have been carried out by Harold after he was released from prison. 6 sex workers were murdered in 1964 and 1965 by an unknown assailant dubbed Jack the Stripper. The name came from the fact that all the victims were left completely nude. Harold had lived near where the bodies were found at the time, but other than that, there isn't any evidence linking him to the crimes. Harold was said to be a good kid who told police that he committed murder simply because he had an urge to kill. Would 20 years in prison have rid him of that urge, or would he still have it and given into it in the years after his release? When a monster just kills because they need to kill, it's pretty common for them to not be able to resist the urge to kill again, even after decades in prison. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.